It seems more and more cogent to despair of any proper um, determination of um the essence of liberalism, um, because even the simplest definition of um, what a republic is, for instance, seems to vie with the other definitions, or the other most dispositive claims to bind us all in one island, rather than to be live island existence or island existence apart from the whole. Um, the version that says a republic is a place where there's not a king, so that there's the obvious example immediately in the first of the North Atlantic commercial revolutions in America, then followed by the second North Atlantic commercial revolution in 1789. And in fact, in 1789, the Americans weren't done um, with everything they had to do, I think, with respect to establishing a perfect and ambition towards more perfect union, as it says. This definition, liberalism, is removing the king for the sake of the republican form of government. Then it could be modified with Montesquieu or something like that. I don't see how that's any less cogent than saying. Now, it's more subtle in pointing to Locke, because we have to remember in Locke, when he says there's a social contract, I mean, the essence of that would be very simple. It's basically it's basically citizens who have. I mean, what it means. Well, that if I just say citizens rather than subjects, then it repeats the same definition we just went through. Because subjects are subjects, so the king, citizens are citizens under a so-called representative body of some kind. But what's the actual essence that Locke is introducing with the social contract theory? In the strict sense, what it is to say that one has not inherent duties but rights. This always proves impossible. So, I mean, of course, so rights meaning there's things you can do, and your personal autonomy surveys them, and some of them, since there's I can't say universal agreement. There's not universal agreement on the point, but very general and strong agreement on the point that property and promissory obligations should be upheld, and therefore autonomy or having rights sort of requires these other Lockean claims to the basics. And then, but again, we're getting into the details. What is the essence of Locke's move? It's simply rights rather than duties. But again, it's worthless to just repeat that formula, or almost. It's not worthless entirely, because it gives us like a platform to keep trying to, under this rubric, let's solve the problem. But the direct meaning is rights are they're discretionary. You could exercise your rights, but you don't have to. You could opt out. Whereas duties are a kind of piety. They're part of the religious piety. Duty and piety are the same thing almost. Duty is obligation. But then, okay, so I think that's fairly clear. So there's one version is at the level of sort of American thinking. It just says there's not a king. There's this other, whatever it is, and they claim to be representing us. Congress, so-called. And there's a constitution. Maybe. I mean, okay, let's not go to, I was about to say, but, we see what's happening with the courts, right? With the courts being totally party-free. So you wonder, is there really a constitution? Maybe it's just rule by constitution rather than the true description of, if this object claiming to be the true description of the American people and their way of self-governance, hearkening to the later statement by Lincoln, by, for, and of the people. How is it that there can be a war about the interpretation of this true thing? And that's homologous also, I would say, to this question that Dugin's raising, where he says, oh, the Pope is changing something that's true and eternal through their theological interpretations. And then he makes a sidestep and sort of, it's almost, there's almost too much audacity in it. It's like he's wearing some clothes out of fashion or something in the times of Paris when that really mattered. It's like he simply declares, oh, well, the Orthodox Church does have some theology a bit, and that could help to explain to people more clearly, explain to the Narod more. Again, yeah, we're getting into a lot of problems here. Does the Narod actually exist? Is it if you scratch the surface of the post-Soviet Russian, you immediately get the Narod? Or isn't there something that's transformed even in the essence of the people, which it seems more plausible to me? But okay, all these questions open up. But I was just saying, yeah, the theological interpretation and the immediate truth prior to the 1054 schism, I don't think, by the way, that it happened all at one time like that. There's if you look at like the disputes on the use of images, the AI-conism, these disputes between the I think, can't they just be called the Latin and the Greek part of the church? I think there's both Latin and Greek mass saying in Constantinople, but are in Byzantium, to be more accurate. But it's really the Bishop of Rome is the Latin version, and then you have the Greek version, I think, which is probably, that's, I would bet that the Greek version is the one at the great place of worship at Sophia, at the great chapel. It must have been the Greek version of the Mass, right? So we have, yeah, there's two different versions, and then, yeah, the Greek version is probably, it's interesting, that brings one more into direct contact with Plato through the tradition feeding on the Septuagint translation, which is woven Plato into, through the resources of the Library of Alexandria, has woven pan-Hellenistic thought into Hellenistic thought, into the thought of what came after Alexander, the empire, the regional empire, which was, of course, split up between Alexander's generals, but everybody was in contact. We get, yeah, so there's some analogy there, which stems from this notion of the constitutional order and all this stuff. So we could spin, at any point we could spin out of control, but let's just state the same thing clearly again. So first version of liberalism, and the whole idea behind this is uh, there is no version of liberalism in power anymore. It's teetering. It's teetering. So it's at least been tink tapped by that Vaz Brise situation, but instead of with the Nietzsche uses a simple fact that it doesn't hit us as Americans as we don't have gendered words in the same way, but just that okay, it's assumed that originally some people with a serious purpose have assigned. It didn't just happen spontaneously, but people actively assigned genders to nouns, and or to the words that follow the definite article, let's say, to show the variation on the concept of noun taken grammatically, and that aletheia in Greek. So you could see it ends with an A. So this is like a typical female name ends in an A, and mostly in Greek and Latin, Claude, Claudia, and so on. And you'll get in German Wahrheit, which is the feminine, and die Wahrheit. So it shows in the article rather than in the actual word, as that's the ones that are like names. And then you have, in Latin too, you have veritas, which is sort of sounds like a Latin female name. It has an S on the end. But this situation of liberalism seems to be showing itself as coming into the just continuously glance around at the media environment, glance around at Trump is caught in this cybernetic loop with the Morning Joe and these ridiculous shows, and or it's like some kind of Darwinian situation where you only find out how the new traits get in, and the neo-Darwinian synthesis and the new traits are apparently coming from Steve Witkoff or something, or some little conversation that signals over from Putin or something. It's strange the way Trump keeps saying that he respects Putin in this gangster's way, which makes me wonder whether actually there's a blackmail situation could be possible, because Trump keeps having to kowtow constantly, it seems to be, to Putin somehow. Maybe he actually has to kowtow to Putin rather than what everybody interprets it as just his natural Slavish sort of egotism and admiration of strongmen, in the sense of outwardly strong. This is almost uniformly the case when you have sort of a puffed chest, outwardly strong individual. The inner core is always tends to be squishy. And you see that in Robert De Niro so clearly. You just compare the character that he played in that L.A. Machine gun robbery film with very hard character, very tough character, and then you compare what he's actually like when he's like showing his personal reality, the way the people that really know him see him. It's always like this with this kind of quote-unquote social strongman. I mean, to the extent that one can call Putin, or, I mean, that's different than being Cary Grant. That's different than being especially favored by the opposite sex, social strongman. But it's almost always that a social strongman has this reverse where they're weak in their private life. So let's just review this. I mean, just after giving that example to show just some peculiar details of the situation, but we could have always, in antiquity, we could find plenty of odd, detailed situations concerning what Nero was up to or whatever, Caligula, or Tiberius for that matter. But let's just look again. Let's state the simple case here for saying liberalism is broken as an idea and no longer exists in a certain sense. One, yeah, there's a simple American interpretation. The king is gone. Now we have the Congress and the so-called representatives and the senators. Two, we have the Lockean claim that basically, I'm having trouble stating this, but basically, I would say natural right defeats natural law. At least it's sort of like if you think of like, where Marx and Engels are saying, it's not that we totally discount the forces of the idea, but it's just like we had to polemically exaggerate that a little bit, but it's really fairly close. So it's sort of like basically Locke saying, yeah, rights have a little bit more power under this regime, the so-called liberal regime where laissez-faire comes in and property has lost its manifold meaning and only has a very narrow meaning to do with the contract. Henry Son Mermain says the same thing later with the first as status, meaning gentry, then as contract, where supposedly everyone's equal. The supposed equality of the all in the face of God. So that's interesting to say God, or this special kind of liberal son, very much coincides with the idea of equality of making contracts and promissory obligations. So, yeah, and then in the current fashion, that's Sloterdijk, in his own way, sees that very clearly, because that's why he talks so much about Singapore. Singapore is the most liberal society that exists on that view, because they got it at like secondhand and they really believed in it. They got it as a population that hadn't been sort of inoculated and had all kinds of centers where strong ideas could vie against that and laugh at it, where there was some kind of separation of powers of the ideas that correspond to the liberal order. The science declares, makes some declarations, and philosophy loses place, but it still exists, still upkept, like the poor relative that shouldn't be allowed to go under, as Jakob Burckhardt said. But okay, let's just do the two and then try to do a third. The first is, again, King, Congress. The second, rights versus law. And law is something you're compelled to do. You're compelled to law. It's obligatory. Right? Your rights are open. This was also discussed in Dostoevsky's Writer's Diary, which said he overheard this type of conversation going on about whether the law forbids or commands in a train carriage somewhere on the way to some Western capital. About, we're talking about like 1870 or something. Yeah, we have those two. But then, what's the other one? Kant. So we have Kant's version. I'm trying to say all these have like almost equal cogency. And then it's just absurd the amount of things we're trying to read into. Who nobody actually is propelled by this. So what is it? What are we referring to here with all this? So the Kant version is the talk all you want and discuss whatever you want, but obey version. So that differs from rights rather than law, natural rights rather than natural law, in that um, it moves not from the question of, what can I do, as against simple obligation to obey the law. There is no question for Kant of rights. But there is the question of openly discussing what the law is and then change. So for Kant, it's totally, you're like kind of on the other, I'd say Steve Bannon's kind of on the other side of this. He's like, he says he's not a conservative because conservatives are, in his phrase, pussies. So in other words, he doesn't. Yeah, and he doesn't think things have to be done through the current legal structure necessarily. Whereas Kant is absolutely, totally conservative in this sense, is that he thinks everything must be absolutely. It can't even approach something like Roy Cohn or something like that. Like try to abuse the adversarial system to make it make it unfair somehow through the extremes. Turned it into an extreme sport instead of what it's meant to be, instead of something that's meant to exhibit the truth. So we have so the Kant version does not exist in a way. It does and it doesn't. Some people do actually take that view of everything has to be done somehow in a very fair way, but we can have free speech, which includes also on the negative side the freedom to lie. But it's supposed to help us to come to eventually decide on the best laws. But it actually also has this propensity to make the laws seem absurd and just like tools of the powerful. Because of the rapid change, shows that they're sort of they're somehow not true. They lack that. They're not reverenced really. They're not. There's not that piety in the obedience towards them. That doesn't exist anymore. And partially Kant allows for this. So he allows obedience to be somehow bashed, but under the notion that the whole nation could be something like the author of the theological investigations, who was a student of Heidegger, somehow pushing the edges of Catholic theology or something like that, but within the overall discipline of the church, within the Catholic system, without undermining it. That the whole society could be something like, it could question, but it could question in a very polite way somehow. I think so for all these points, we could roughly convince ourselves, liberalism has no clear sense anymore. But it has to be, that's what we're seeing, right? That's what we're seeing objectively. Does Nietzsche's, how so far does Nietzsche's analysis see into this? That's an interesting question. I think, one is some extent, again, like I was suggesting last time, one is to some extent compelled to say, isn't nihilism the real interpretation of our age? Haven't we been facing up to that? And then there's a certain sense where Nietzsche's saying only if we would face up to what we have to face up to could we also overcome nihilism. It's not a. It's something that comes unbidden. It's not um, an elective affinity, um, and does. I mean, within that, I think you get the next structure you get is economic, a sheerly economic interpretation, as with, for instance, in Dugin's Liberalism 2.0 article, where we have the discussion between Popper, Hayek, or I guess Hayek, Popper, and Soros over the interpretation of the world system, as it were, to put it in Manuel Wallerstein's terms. And it's surely it's surely a matter of economic theory. It's surely a matter of well, I should say not surely, but it's decided on measure on the side of economics, in the sense that it's asked, what about minimal principles, and then basically, of course, in the Hayek version, you get the sheer market fundamentalism. But the point I'm trying to get to is that the market fundamentalism is presented as sort of an a priori solution to